Here we are today with my good friend Sebastian Rusk from the podcast Launch Lab and a very notable MC of live events. Obviously not doing quite as many of them today, but I brought him on here to talk about marketing and everybody's kind of stuck at home right now. So it might be the perfect time to start the podcast that you've always thought about. And just wanted to chat with him about other things going on, what he's seeing in marketing, what he's been up to, and how can we be the most productive that we can be during this COVID-19 shutdown. So Sebastian, thank you much.
Will Dukes, what's up, buddy?
Not too much. And like I said, feel free. You can intro me and interview me for your podcast too at the same time if you want.
Sure. I don't know about the same time. That might be a little complicated, but
we're going back and forth. It's all. So how are things where you're at?
Well, they're the same as they are everywhere else, I think. A little uncertain, a little challenging, a little frustrating, and a little, just a smidge of normalcy in the middle of all that. I've thankfully been able to access my studio this entire time because there's no one here. So It's just me. So that works out really well. And I'm in the process of still launching my YouTube channel. I launched the channel about a year ago. And then I recently joined a YouTube intensive to learn how to actually be a YouTuber. And so much more involved than just uploading a video. So I am in the middle of that process right now. And it's going great. Channel's growing. I've got over 30,000 views on the channel. One of my videos has 12,000 views. Very pretty excited about that. Yeah, the reason I want to grow that is, who doesn't want to earn a check from YouTube monthly, just cause. And secondly, from a sales standpoint, who doesn't want a good lead generation solution, from your YouTube channel? Like, there's nothing better to hear than, I just watched your YouTube channel on, and I loved it, and I actually want to schedule a call to chat about my podcast. So I'm really excited about that. I'm building my list on, we run Facebook ads, give away a free podcast checklist, and that puts people into a funnel, and I talk to them and market to them and, spread my podcasting gospel to them that way. And, we're just on a mission here to help 100 people start a podcast in 2020.
Yeah. Yeah.
That seems to be the mission here. And I'm staying pretty consistent and focused on that mission, Corona or no Corona.
Well, so let's just back up from the whole Corona thing and even talk about the big picture of that. Why is it so important that people kind of shift to the audio thing? It kind of seems like podcasts have surged in popularity, and maybe even in some cases even more so than like video and other things like that. But it kind of seems like that's more like radio, right? And so radio preceded television in terms of general media, and kind of fell back after TV came off, in the historical aspect of things. But this audio side of things seems to be making stuff, and it's not something that I've really pushed into. It's just kind of been on the fringes of my radar, I guess. But there are certainly examples of things that I will listen to, or I'm driving back and forth between Orlando and Miami. Definitely certain. Even if it is in video format, like, I think like, Joe Rogan or something sometimes, so it's recorded, but generally I'm just listening to that, obviously, while I'm driving. But why should people even focus on a podcast?
Well, if we look at how technology advances us, and that the reason that technology has progressed so quickly, and we've consumed technology advancing us so quickly, is because it is frictionless. Each opportunity for technology to make our lives easier is making our lives just that much less frictionless. For instance, if I send you a video, for some reason your brain says, I have to stop and watch this video. Nobody mentioned anything about watching the video because the video has sound, but our brain is curious. So we want to go, well, if it's a video, we automatically associate that with watching it. Even though that is not true, our brain feels obligated to watch it. So that's another step in the process. I have to get the link that you sent me. I have to look at it. I have to click on it, and then I have to watch what's on the screen. That's an additional layer. versus listen to my radio show. Great. What channel is it on? 95.7. Excellent. Today's modern language. Listen to my podcast. Great. Send me a link. Click on the link. Podcast plays. I move on with my day. So I think it's a matter of being less frictionless, number one. And number two, I think if we look at where we're at with this whole revolution of podcasting replacing radio, YouTube, Netflix, Hulu, Amazon Video replacing television, that is what's taking place. And it's very, very it'd be very, very tough to argue that isn't the current state of affairs and will continue to be for years to come. I firmly believe that things will never be the same in the world of radio. In fact, if we look at the clear channels of the world scurrying to figure out this whole podcast game, scurrying to figure out how do we convert what we've always done to what we need to be doing now. I just think it's an incredible shift in the way that we consume media content, from video to audio. But podcasting, I just don't think anybody's in a rush to get back in their car, turn on their radio, tune into 101.5 and listen to another ad from Don Mealy Chevrolet. They're just not doing it. They're more inclined to want to listen to 15 different podcasts at any given time at the same time, because they can start it, stop it, replay it, restart it, skip the ads, start it on their way to the gym, play it on their way home, etc.
Binge listen like they binge watch Game of Thrones or something.
That's the world that we're living in. Exactly. It's a binge watch, binge world. It's a binge watch, binge world that we live in, right? We want everything yesterday. We'll pay to have it yesterday. And instead of watching just this week's episode, oh no, we're going to watch the whole freaking season.
But it seems, and I totally get that, but it seems to me that the one difference, like I think about when I'm typically listening, and you know, I know all people come from all different walks of life, but like things that are verbal that I really want to listen to, I find that I am listening to in the car, or if that really is probably one of the key things. You know, maybe jogging or going to the gym. I kind of get that, where there's some other kind of occupied. You can't, you know, you're visually focused on something else in the world around you. But just kind of like listening or having a podcast in the background, like I might just turn on the radio. That's always been seen kind of foreign to me, like, because it seems like it's much more intentional than it's something that's passive. So I might just listen to music and be passive, but if I'm listening to a podcast, it's because there's some kind of information that I'm actually wanting to get out of it. But then just sitting down like at the couch or in a chair and just listening to a podcast, I don't know. But
yeah, like you did back in the day, you know, Saturday evenings, you just sat next to the old, you know, radio phone. What was that big old thing? You know, they just sit around the radio and just listen, you know. Yeah, that definitely doesn't happen, because we're also living in we used to live in an overstimulated population. Now I think that the only thing stimulating our minds these days is Netflix and our phones. So, but yeah, you're right. Pressing play and cleaning the house, pressing play on a podcast and going to clean the house, maybe. I don't know. It just depends on what your preference is and how you want to consume content. But typically, you're tuning into a podcast because there is intentional content there where I really want to learn something or listen to what they've got to go say. And if I'm, you know, sidetracked to doing other things, you know, that's different. You know, maybe making a cup of coffee and standing in the kitchen while it's playing is one thing. But, you know, I think we all consume content in our own unique way.
Well, and I think that's very key. With that in mind, like, obviously nobody's driving anywhere, you know, or if it is, it's just to the grocery store or whatnot for the most part right now. I actually went up to help on the family farm this past weekend, and so that was like a 2-hour drive. But, you know, other than that, I haven't even been in the truck hardly, just other than go to the grocery store. So, but even pre-corona and when things get back to some semblance of normal, whatever they're going to look like in the future, knowing that, you know, most people's commutes are what, 30, 45 minutes, maybe generally. I mean, is that a good guideline for thinking about, like, if somebody was going to start a podcast? Because I mean, you watch a guy like Joe Rogan or something else, and, you know, he'll have a freaking 3-hour conversation with somebody, and that always just blew my mind. But
it's the number one podcast in the world.
Because it's out there. So what is that? Is it the fact that everybody is straight consuming his podcast, or is it the the clips that he drops on YouTube all the time that, maybe are only 7, 10, 15 minutes that are really kind of driving those subscriptions. I don't know.
I think the whole thing grew with it grew based on being able to do just that, create clips, and all they did was sit down and start recording one day,
Yeah.
And that's basically how the show started to take off, from my understanding. But Joe gets great guests, and he's a phenomenal interviewer. Phenomenal.
Yeah, absolutely. So, I mean, with that, other than some tips, and I know you've got a ton of content up, and you've talked and put out there, talked about different ways that people can get started simply. They don't need a big setup. They don't need your beautiful big fancy headphones and microphone and everything like that. They can just literally do it on their phone. But it seems like those interview type are pretty popular. But even just kind of sharing knowledge, like what are some other tips that you generally give people on setup, on getting started, and how to structure that content? Because you can have good content or good thoughts or be an expert, but people also have a tendency to just get on and start rambling, especially if they're not talking to themselves.
That is correct. So your number one question you have to ask yourself is, why do I want to start a podcast? It goes back to that $1 million why question, because it's extremely valuable information when you ask yourself that, because sometimes the answer is, I don't know. And if the answer is, well, because I got a lot to talk about, it's just a wrong answer. If the answer is more in line with, because I've got a message that I want to share with the world, what I know and my story and what I've been through and what I've learned and what's taken place, if I'm able to share this and provide this to the world as a value add to the world, it's going to change lives. It's going to change people's mindset. It's going to shift people's thinking. It's going to make the world a better place in general. If I start a podcast, well, then you're on the right track as far as why you would want to start a podcast. You want to start a podcast to monetize it and make $1 million and be the next Joe Rogan. Bad game plan is what I would like to say. And I speak from experience, because that's the number one question I ask people on a daily basis that want to talk about starting their podcast. Why do you want to start a podcast? If you can't get through why you want to start a podcast with me, then I'm going to have you go back to the drawing board and figure out your why, because I can't give you your why. That's something that you know only about and that resonates with you. And once people figure that out, usually people know what it is. Once you figured out that why, it's like, great. So we figured out why we want to start a podcast. We got a story to tell. We got value to provide. We want to be able to provide value, build a community, provide value to that community. Great. What kind of show is it going to be, right? So if you're a litigation attorney, talking about litigation is probably not the most exciting topic. But if you're a litigation attorney that's very interested in mental health, and you want to identify other attorneys who are very interested in mental health, that were suicidal at one time, very depressed at one time, almost lost their law practice, went through all these experiences, were able to pull themselves out and now support the community of mental health and depression, well, now maybe you're onto something. If you're a...
And is that just the niche though? Like trying to get that specific? And kind of, I guess anything else we're doing in marketing, like figuring out what is that message?
Yeah, exactly. Figuring out the message, figuring out your why, and why you want to do that, and then being strategic with rolling the content out. So like, great. So it's going to be an interview series where I interview other attorneys that are focused on mental health. Excellent. I want to talk about this, and then I started going and identifying who those individuals are. People that are smarter than me, cooler than me, have done more things than me, that know more than me, and I interview these people. The goal is for them to be able to say, hey, I was on this show and they helped me market my show by having them on. But once you figure out your why, and then you figure out what you're going to talk about and how you're going to structure each episode based on, if it's going to be an interview series, how are those interviews strategically designed so that the show grows and you're providing valuable information.
So, that was what kind of sparked this whole interview, or the reason I reached out to you, is that post that you put on LinkedIn the other day. Just talking about that, this is something that people can do at this time.
It is. There's never been a better time to help people start a podcast ever, because of the fact of where we're at with technology. You got to remember this stuff started, I don't know, late 2002, 2001. Apple created what is now called a podcast because it was a cast that was supposed to be played on an iPod. Right. So podcast, and then it just continued to grow, but didn't start to pick up momentum until I'd say 2008, 2009, whenever the Serial series dropped, where that criminal case ended up getting turned over because they gave that's when it really started to become popular. But it's always been around. The podcast has been around, but I think 2008, 2009 started to get real popular, and then Rogan came on the scene, and as it continues to replace old technology with relevant technology, it's become more and more relevant. But we're looking at, the numbers right now. There's right over 880,000 podcasts in total. Average show doesn't make it past episode 6. So it's like, man, that's a lot of shows that end up in the podcast graveyard. All right. Well, how do I prevent?
So why is that?
Yeah, exactly. So how do I prevent myself from going into the podcast graveyard? Well, it starts with a great initial game plan. When you say I want to start a podcast, what's the initial plan? Is it, I want to create a show that provides value, that tells stories, that educates people, that interviews people, that again puts out as much value as I possibly can, and I want to interview people and I want to share that episode. If you stay committed to that mission, then you're going to stay committed to keeping the show going. Your mission is, I want to interview people that can have a conversation with me, that I can provide value to people, that can hopefully change their mindset, change their life, et cetera, et cetera. You stay committed with that, then the show doesn't end up in the podcast graveyard. I'm very careful with the word commitment, because who am I to tell you that you're not committed about something? But I do utilize the word commitment in the space of, if you want this show to actually happen and continue, you must be committed to the process and ongoing development and growth of the show. Without that commitment component, it's not going to work. Now, that doesn't mean I'm telling you have to be committed to anything. I'm just telling you what's required. And there's a fine line. There's a lot of people coming out there going, you're not committed, So I hate to tell people what they're not committed to, but that's why I have a pretty thorough screening process when we have a conversation with people about helping them start their podcast. And that is around that conversation of why. And usually we found that people are crystal clear about that why, and they just start rambling off after the why they want to start the show. And that's how you've got an ideal person right there. Like, this person's ready. They know their why. They have an idea of what they want to do. They just need to kind of be brought down and organized a little bit into
the how, maybe.
Right. Exactly.
Because there are some mechanics, but I think you mentioned the key thing there to me is, that commitment, or it's, this is what's required. Right. So what is that from your perspective that is required these days? You got your checklist right there?
So are you talking about what's required to start a podcast?
Yeah. No, what is required in terms of the effort that people need to be committed to?
Again, how long is the show going to be? Are you going to talk? Is it just going to be you? Is it going to be an interview series? Are you interviewing people?
Not mechanics. No. You said that people have to be committed to something. They have to be committed to get in there, and this is what's going to be required of you to make this thing not get into the graveyard.
Yeah, the requirements are continue to record new episodes and put new content out.
But so what is required? Like, how much? Like, are we talking monthly? Are we talking weekly?
That's entirely up to the person starting the show. Are you going to do the show once a month, once a week, twice a month, twice a week? Whatever you decide, however many episodes you decide you want to do on a monthly basis is what your level of commitment needs to be. It's not just recording the episodes. You got to talk about them and share them with people and talk, and share them with your network. So there is some work involved. I would say maybe if it's an hour for an interview and an hour for marketing, 2 hours a week.
Okay.
Yeah.
So that's not so much what is required for it to be a successful podcast. That's just required for you to actually sustain the podcast. You might not get a huge number of subscriptions or anything like that.
Correct.
So what is talk to me about the other ancillary benefits, right? So some people are going to do this and because they have a big message to share and they want to get a lot of subscriptions, but what are the other benefits that come to a particularly a business owner? We're talking to small businesses through this, and that's I know who a lot of our clients are. But what are some other ancillary benefits? Why should they do this? Why should they even think about it or take the time to do it right now, even if it is only once a month?
Well, I think that if you take a look at what your competition's doing, chances are they probably don't have a podcast. So being able to be that first to the market pertaining to in your industry to create a podcast and to build a community around that, I think would be a first mover's advantage. If that's not the case, I think the benefit is content. It's like, why do we start a blog? Well, then it's more content, and the more blog posts we have, the more content's getting indexed and people search for what we do. Chances of them finding one of our blog posts is pretty high. I think the same thing pertains to podcasting, because all of these podcast directories are so heavily indexed on Google and on search engines, so that when people are searching for specific topics like how to sell during COVID-19, and that's the title of one of Will Duke's podcast episodes, one of the podcast distribution channels pops up with a link to that episode, just like it would a blog post. And the video of that episode lives on YouTube, the video is going to pop up there. So people are starting to find you based on the content that you're creating. I think that's really the main the main one is, if your competition's not doing it, you're the first one to do it within your industry, or one of them. I think there's some advantage with that. And then the second would be for content purposes, because we just don't know what content is going to do, but we do know what content does by doing nothing, which is exactly that.
Yeah, but if nobody is doing it like that, so there's first mover advantage in some things, but then could it be that there's just nothing relevant to talk about in your business, and maybe it's more of a hobby thing?
It could be a hobby thing. Maybe your business is really boring. Then you need to come up with something that's really exciting that you like, and figure out how to align that and complement it with what you do. If I'm a copier salesman, and copy sales are pretty boring, but I'm a diehard sports fan, I'm going to figure out a way to talk about sports and copiers.
So back up off podcast for just a second, and just kind of because we've both been around the whole marketing, sales, business promotion aspect. And you've got a varied past of sorts in the things that you've done, and the MCs. How has that shifted? Like, did you have any gigs or anything planned that all of a sudden got just shut down in the middle of this?
Yeah, all of them did. Yeah, all of them did, as in the entire gig world did. So
right,
that was unfortunate. I'd taken a bit of a hiatus from the MC and speaking stuff this year, just because I'm so laser focused on getting this 100 podcasts done here at the Podcast Launch Lab. And I firmly believe that as I tighten up a few things that I've had on the chalkboard that I want to do pertaining to not just helping people start a podcast, but my podcast coaching, our guest research and booking, advertising, sponsorship and promotions, and biz dev aspect, and then also being able to coach people that already have a podcast. So being able to sell my peers something. So I wanted to get all that stuff dialed in, and what we're actively working on right now. So once that stuff's dialed all in, then I can go back and I can re-enter the speaking world, and I don't need to be paid to speak at all. I mean, checks are great, but very rare in the speaking world. So it's better just to be able to say, yes, I'd love to make the connections. I'd love to get booked to speak. And I'd also love the opportunity to be able to sell from the stage in some capacity, not your traditional means of, we've got Becky and Jim in the back with clipboards. Raise your hand if you're ready. Not the traditional one, but being able to integrate what we do here at the Podcast Launch Lab into my talk of how to tell a story by starting a podcast. And being able to know that I've got I ran into our mutual friend where you and I met, Michelle Villalobos. I ran into her in Orlando a couple of weeks back, and she was asking me if I was going to go.
You didn't call me while you were in Orlando? What the hell?
I know, dude. I didn't even put two and two together. You were in Orlando. Goodness, because I still think you're a Miami guy, Will. But she was asking me if I was going to go to the NSA conference this year, the annual conference, and I'm like, gosh, I haven't been in a couple of years. She's like, yeah, it's probably time for you to get back. And I said, I haven't been doing much speaking. People don't pay speakers. And she's like, they don't need to pay speakers. Like, you have a back end.
A big back end. That's what she knows, right? Her
right.
Big back end.
Right. Exactly. So I thought there's a lot of truth in that. So it's good to run into her and be like re-encouraged on that. The MC stuff is a whole different animal. We had Emerge Americas this year. That was on hold. I had a gig in the Bahamas. It's happening in June. That's gone to a virtual event. So continuing to whittle up that, in order to hike up that uphill battle of figuring out the MC stuff, I just put everything on hold until I figure it out. Because once we at least start making some progress on this 100 shows, part of that is I'm creating content around what we're doing, and I'm being on other people's podcasts. I've got my podcast. I'm a product of the product. And from that, opportunity starts to come, and you become the go-to source for what you do. The reason I started to get very granular with you said that there's been a lot of stuff, and it's been true. It's been it's a decade I've been doing this, 10 years. I started my company. Originally it was, hey, listen, I'll help you with your social media. So I'll wash your car on the weekend. I'll, manage your Twitter account. And then it got into, we'll do everything for you. And then I'm like, I don't want to do that either. And I don't want to manage Twitter. And then I got to the point where I don't want anything to do with managing any of your social media platforms. And no, I don't have someone on my team that can do that for me because I have to manage them. Number one. Number two, I've been simultaneously building my personal brand as an author, speaker, and digital storyteller. So I wanted that to be congruent with what I was doing as a business. And being a social media guy did not allow me to do that. Saying I have a social media agency, because there'd be nothing worse than to know that, every PR agency in Miami that drives a white convertible BMW is now a social media agency. Yeah. Like, we totally do PR, right? And I don't want to be associated with that. Yeah, we do social media too. Yeah, we do that too. I didn't want to. I built this brand from nothing other than my knowledge and my ability to leverage social media to build that brand, and for the fact that I was an early adopter. I got on LinkedIn in 2004, but in 2016, people started showing up and be like, podcast. How's the podcast? And I'm thinking, I don't even have my show going right now. I stopped my show 3 times. I'm like, I don't even have my show going right now. And either people don't know what a podcast is, or they do, and they're just earmarking me as like the podcast guy. So I decided to ride that wave, and I started, I created a solution back in 2016 called the Podcast Launch Lab. And I took about 18 months to beta test that. You remember those days. I called you and said, hey, I'm starting a podcast solution. And, the end of last year, I said, okay, so we've sold 10, 12, 13 shows over the past 18 months. It's the high ticket item. It sells for between $2,500 and $3,000. So it's not a fit for everyone, because not everyone makes consecutive 4-figure decisions all the time. Right. But marketers, entrepreneurs, speakers, authors, coaches, people of influence that know their natural next step to start a podcast will. Why? Because, can they start a podcast on their own? Probably, but you have to know what you're doing, how to do it. It's easier just to pay someone to do it. So after I took 18 months to beta test it and figure out that our ideal client is a marketer and entrepreneur, a person just like me and you. Marketers and entrepreneurs. If we took a subcategory, if we created a sub-silo there, it would be authors, speakers, coaches, people of authority that know that their natural next step is to write a book, is to start a podcast. Yeah,
they're not just entrepreneurs, but they naturally are communicating, educating, sharing information.
Sure, right, exactly. So I had to get real granular on that, and then I took the leap of faith to come out and convert an executive suite into a studio here in Coral Gables late last year, because I wanted to get uncomfortable a little bit. I'm like, oh, let's go pay rent on a place, but let's also have a place. This happened to be the same building that I conceptualized the podcast launch lab in. I was just in a shared desk area. It used to be the old business.
Yeah.
So to come back in here and be all full circle, and then to see this office, and I got it, and I was like, I looked around, I was like, oh, I can totally make this my own. It's about 12 by 8. It'll fit 3 people comfortably, 4 people if I absolutely have to, with a podcast interview. But eventually I see us renting the space out for people to come in, and you're in town. Hey, listen, I want to record my podcast, and come in here, and people rent it out for an hour or 2 here and there, which would be cool. That's not really the goal. The goal is more aesthetics. Like, you come in here and you're like, wow, this is cool. So we're working on a deal right now while COVID put everything on hold, but we're working on a deal with Quest Workspaces, who's kind of like they're a co-working space, kind of like a WeWork. And they've got 12 locations from here to New York. They got one in Orlando. And so I'm in conversations right now with the CEO, because she was here in the center a few weeks back and came in. She's like, "Wow, this is cool." I go, "Yeah, imagine having one in every center, and then having a like a Quest Workspaces podcast studio, and like where your members can use it, and like you have your own show, and it features and member spotlights, and it's powered by the Podcast Launch Lab." She's like, "Oh my God, I love it." So,
well, and that kind of model is going to be, I think, very, very keen, right? Because you've had these not what are they, like maker spaces, right? So like folks that want to, they're building or woodworking or metalworking, all this kind of stuff, but everybody doesn't necessarily have the space or the money to buy all this equipment, so they go rent out the spot at the maker space.
right.
Well, likewise, it only makes sense in this day and age when everybody's doing video content, everybody's doing some kind of audio or writing things out, that a co-working space would have those kinds of facilities that they could rent for more professional quality. Even though we've all like I was talking to I think you probably know Neto Almanza from does some stuff, is a B9 member down there. He's done some video production, but he was talking the latest iPhone records in 4K better than a lot of camcorders that people have, DSLRs and stuff. So I mean, people can get high quality stuff, but there's still something about having a studio level performance, or not necessarily a performance, but a just the quality that can kind of come with that.
Well, it's how we communicate now. It's how we market ourselves and how we communicate and how we advertise now. So eventually, companies like the old question forever and a day since 2000 has been, great, what's your website? And the next, like, great, what's your Facebook page? Now it's going to be, great, what's your YouTube channel? Great. In our YouTube channel, we've got our video podcast where we interview this, that, and the other. We've got now another thing that's starting to happen, our internal podcasts. So you've got these large brands that are so big, especially you look at what's taking place now. We're in the middle of a pandemic right now. How much value an internal podcast provide to a company with 500 employees? 200 employees, 100 employees, to be able to have the communications team get on there with our CEO and interview and say, hey, here's where we're headed. Here's what we're doing. Here's new product launches. Instead of getting everybody to Mexico for a week, let's hop everybody on Zoom and have, again, I think that a lot of things that are transitioning and taking place because of COVID are to a benefit. Like I've heard a lot of people say, I think things may be better than they were, prior to COVID with our new normal. Why? Because companies, there's a lot of companies folding left and right, but I don't think these companies are folding because of COVID. I think these companies were all had problems well before.
Well, I've been saying it for the last couple of weeks, and one of my other buddies, brought it back up, and I know I've heard it before, but when the tide goes out, you get to see who was swimming without the shorts on,
right?
And that's exactly what it is. It's like, this is not definitely there are some, like if the government comes and says you cannot operate right now, that's a little bit more of an external force. But like I said, I was up on the farm, and Dad used to always say, you can control everything but the weather. There's always some kind of external force that was going to be influencing your business that you had absolutely no control of. And, are you going to be prepared for it? And there's a lot of people, people have been saying for at least the last 2 years, like, better get ready. The market's going to correct. Things are going to turn around. We've been going for too long. Something's going to happen. And everybody was looking for the last thing, which was like structural integrity with banks and all that kind of other stuff. And no, it's just going to be a global pandemic that causes everybody to duck and cover and shelter at home and literally grind the economy to a halt. But what can you do about it? And so that's the whole reason that I started doing these things. I mean, I generally work from home a lot of the times anyway, do a little bit of travel here and there. We'll go see clients. Obviously that shut down, but it's otherwise it hasn't shifted too much for me, but it's definitely shifted a lot for other people. So
it really has.
Just in the larger context of marketing and focusing, I've been talking to people about, this could be the time that people take their side hustles and actually make them their full-time gig.
You're forced to make the jump. Yeah, you're forced to make the jump now. So why not just give it a test run right now,
right,
and see what it looks like? I mean, that's a great bit of advice. That's actually, I mean, as an entrepreneur, you never forget the day that you made the jump. Number one. Number two, you never forget that thought process of, I'm never going back.
Yeah.
Ever. Now, I've had a bunch of jobs over the past 10 years, odd end gigs here and there that I've pulled off as client gigs and campaigns and all kinds of
whatever you do to pay the bills, right?
Yeah, Scooby-Doo endings on however it's done, whatever you gotta do to figure it all out. But I would never say I'm closing the door because I'm taking a job here. And I don't care how much that job is for. Well, I stand corrected. There are a couple I'd maybe consider. But still, this day and age, the part of the deal would be like, I'm going to work, but my company stays in play, and I'm able to do it on nights and weekends, and I'm allowed to have a team doing it during the day. As long as that can go, I can take this position. That's why a lot of these acting, CMO, and all these other titles have started to come about over the past years, because brands look at it, hey, listen, I can get a guy of Sebastian's caliber and knowledge in here on a C-level and not have to pay him as a C-level.
Right.
And it's a win-win for both of us.
Well, I mean, that is exactly, you looked me up on LinkedIn, and that's basically what it's evolved to for me with a lot of my clients is, they look at me as their chief marketing officer, as their business development director. And, we've hired in staff. I've helped them hire salespeople or other folks that come in and maybe they do the day-to-day. And basically I'm just working on that fractional basis with them to be able to direct and to manage and to coordinate all of their other folks. Right. So I think that we're likely to see that happening on a different level too. And obviously a lot of the gig economy, or what we typically think about the gig economy, has gotten shut down, but not all of it. And I think you're going to
a lot of it's moving virtual too.
Well, exactly. I think you're going to see that. You're going to see that expand out into other areas, right? That you haven't normally seen it. So, just a gig on like you say, just for particular rules, like, this fractional CFO model, COO model. Thank you, sweetie. Thank you, baby. My daughter's bringing me the mail. But we're going to see a lot of different changes. Okay, thank you.
Yeah, we are. We sure are. Well, I want to go back to one question. We're almost out of time, I know, and I want to go back. I want to go back to the original question you had asked me on. What is someone? You asked me about the requirements and the process on here, but I really want to drive home the point of, what do I need in order to start a podcast? And you don't need anything outside of a smartphone, iPhone specifically. I can't speak to an Android, but an iPhone specifically, because I know that the voice recorder on it with the microphone is exceptional, especially if you're in a very quiet place with carpet. If you plug in the ear pods with the cord that come with every iPhone on the planet and always have, those are going to act as a very good, because they have a little mic on the cord there. Right, and always see people lifting that microphone up to their face, which really isn't required. It would probably make noise on the mic if you recorded it. But if I always say, you can go in your closet at home and record your podcast on your phone, you're 50% off to the races. I mean, you're like halfway into the game to be able to do it. I talk a lot about, and you and I were talking about this before we started recording, the Anchor app, Anchor.fm. Anchor is a solution that is is both a smartphone app and also a desktop solution. And it allows you to record a podcast, produce a podcast, edit a podcast, publish a podcast, market a podcast, and monetize a podcast, all within their platform for free. Spotify just bought them for some ludicrous amount of money. But if you're listening to this, watch this right now, download the Anchor app, start playing around with it. Will is doing it too. He's getting his homework in with Anchor.fm too, because you can literally record it right there. You don't have to record in your voice recorder. You can hit record within the Anchor app and record it right there. But before all that's done, just sit down and say, why do I want to start a podcast? And answer that question. What do I want to call my show? And answer that question. What kind of show do I want it to be? Am I going to interview people? Is it just me talking? How long is the show going to be? Define those 4 simple things and then begin recording. And once you start recording, you automatically create momentum for yourself. Automatically. Every time I record a podcast episode, every time I record a video for my YouTube channel, I bulk shoot usually. So I'll shoot between 2 and 4 videos in each sitting. Okay. But I tell you what, once I get past that second video, I'm off to the races. And I'm like, I was going to do 4, but now I'm going to do 5, because I get inside my head and I go, wow, what does it feel like to have 5 episodes under my belt to be edited.
Well, that's just like going to the gym, right? Like most of the time, most people's problem getting to the gym is not getting in the gym. It's the getting off the couch and actually getting to the gym.
Right.
Right.
That's everybody's challenge. The gym. I remember that place. The gym.
Well, definitely these days, but a lot of comparisons with that. So you mentioned the graveyard before. You mentioned the dedication. You got to have all of that. But maybe just kind of a last real practical question here. Where is and maybe you read the book. Seth Godin wrote the Dip, right? And so he talks about how no matter what you knew, anytime you're starting something new, we typically will have like this little surge where it's new and it's novel and it's great, but then inevitably you always have the dip down at the bottom, and that's where people either make the decision to push through it and to continue on, or they quit. And he makes a really good argument in there about it's not something that everybody just needs to overcome. Like, it may be the best decision for you to quit at the bottom of the dip, but if you continue to push through, you'll start to see the benefit on the other side. So for you, or from your experience, obviously helping people doing this and kind of coaching them through it, probably having to give them a swift kick in the butt to continue on at times, like what are those things that typically trip people up or kind of initiate them into that dip where, oh, this is a little bit more work, or this isn't quite as fun as I thought it was going to be?
It's just that it's, they listen to podcasts, they see Joe Rogan's podcast, they see people talking about podcast, and they live that podcast fantasy. And then they get into it. It's kind of like that quote, like most people, like hard work until they, I forget what the hard work quote is, but until they realize it's
most people like opportunity, but it's often disguised in overalls and looks like hard work or something.
Exactly. So the whole, shiny, sparkly item of podcasting seems great until you get down into it. That's why I help clients really create a streamlined process for being able to do, like, we help them start their first 5 episodes. That's what our initial program is all about. So it's like, how do we get to that first 5 episodes? Well, let's go identify the first 5 interviews and let's go schedule those people to be interviewed. Okay. First things first. Let's do 1 a month, and we're going to start a month from now, right? So we have a little bit of time to plan, right? We'll start in month 2. We'll start scheduling those 5 episodes. And once we get those 5 episodes scheduled, well, now we're on the hook. So for accountability purposes and keeping your word, you've already scheduled these people's time on their calendar, and it's not to be wasted, canceled because of your, ineptability to commit to something, right?
Yeah.
Number 1. Number 2, you go work backwards now. Great. Now I've got all these people. Well, now what kind of series am I going to do? Well, all these people are marketers and entrepreneurs. I should probably talk about something that pertains to market entrepreneurship. And you start mapping out each episode. But I think getting people scheduled on the calendar, and having that actual date in place is extremely powerful. Number 1. Number 2, it allows you to go back in there and then once you've got the first 5 schedules, like, well, shit, let's go schedule another 5, right? So I think you create momentum by putting a plan together, and that's really what our forefront of that, the accountability factor, and that's the main reason. Thank God we're in business, is because people are willing to invest in a solution that they know they may not be good at, but they need to do, but invest with someone who knows what they're doing, because they can not only tell them what to do, but hold them accountable to doing it. I think accountability is huge with this.
Same reason people hire a personal trainer, right?
Right. Exactly. Personal trainer, sales trainer, podcast trainer. Exactly. Because you want to get better and you want accountability. You want someone to say, hey, you were wrong, or hey, you said you were going to do this and you didn't. And because of that, we're not continuing with what we were going to do. That's how the program works. And
a lot of just having that objective feedback and validation is often going to be very helpful in moving all that forward, right?
Yep.
Absolutely. So, yeah.
Absolutely.
Right. So
the one takeaway is, if you've been thinking about starting a podcast, go to podcastlaunchpad.com. No. If you've been thinking about starting a podcast, go download the Anchor.fm app and be with the question, why do I want to start a podcast? If you get that overwhelming feeling where your mind or verbally start just rattling off why you want to do it, because from a value standpoint, and because it's going to make the world a better place and you're going to make people's lives better, then you're on the right track. If you
Well,
just want to sit around with a bunch of buddies with a bunch of beers and talk a bunch of rubbish and think it's going to be funny because you guys think you're funny when you're drunk, probably not the best idea.
Well, to that point, then, there's a lot of other stuff that goes in that, and people get caught up on Facebook, and just like some of the people we listen to, like Gary Vee or some of these other folks, just talk about like getting out there and just making the content. Don't worry about the marketing of it. Don't worry about the feedback or how many likes or how many downloads or how many subscriptions or things you're getting. I mean, is that 5 just kind of a magic number that you've seen? Like if you can get somebody past 5, if they'll just commit to doing 5, no matter what feedback is, then
chances are the show's going to continue, and they're going to continue to crank out episodes because they've got a plan. They follow our plan. It's like with anything else. You can buy coaching and all kinds of plans. You can hire a personal trainer, and you can also go home and eat pizza,
which can outrun your fork, right?
Right. Exactly.
So people can go sit in their closet, start a podcast with Anchor, but if they do want to be serious about it, they have the means to do that, to hire somebody or to get some professional advice from somebody like yourself. How can they contact you?
Yeah, so you can hit me up anywhere online. I spend a lot of time on LinkedIn, so look me up, Sebastian Rusk, just like it sounds. I'm sure that the show notes, wherever you're listening, consuming this, should have a link.
Maybe so. We're just getting started.
To my LinkedIn channel, it should have show notes. Should have a link to my LinkedIn channel. Right. Instagram is at Seb Rusk. On Facebook too. You can email me srusk@podcastlaunchlab.com, and more information about starting a podcast too is on our website, podcastlaunchlab.com. You can get a free ebook on why you should start a podcast on our website too, and that'll put you into our email sequence where I'll talk to you consecutively and give you all kinds of valuable information. And of course, our YouTube channel, youtube.com/podcast launch lab, is a plethora, a library of podcast launch educational content to teach you the who, what, why, and where of starting a podcast. In fact, if you go to my YouTube channel and you watch 10% of the videos that are on there, you'll have everything you need in order to start a podcast.
Very good. Very good. Well, sir, I know it is almost bourbon time.
It's bourbon 30.
It's bourbon 30. So I will let you break from the day. I appreciate you taking the time to talk with me and to share some of your knowledge and wisdom. And
it's always a pleasure, Will Dukes.
Stay well, my friend, and to your lovely sister and daughter as well. And send my love.
Likewise, and give my love to the family too.
All right, sir.
Thanks, brother. And may you too.